5 minutes before we start.
Hey, Chris, can you hear me? This is Karen Mullins.
Hey, Karen, how are you? I saw you came in as an attendee, and I've just promoted you to panelist, so I can hear you now.
Okay, great.
Go.
Thank you.
And for you as well.
Hi, Bob.
Hey, Karen.
Hey, Chris, am I live now?
You are live now. Yeah, you were in the attendee file, but I managed to move you over, so you should be good to go.
I don't know what I did.
It happens. It happens to the best of them. And I notice we have one other attendee. Let's see. We have, I'm going to take the slide off here in a minute. I see Bob Widmer's there. Let me move him over as well. You know, we want him in the meeting. Jocelyn Pritchett is also an attendee, but I don't have her on my list, I think, as a panelist, unless she is. Does anyone know, Chris or Brian, do you know if Jocelyn Pritchett should be a participant in the meeting?
I do not know. I wonder if Jennifer might know. I don't know if she was.
I don't have her on any of my lists.
I don't. I'm going to leave Jocelyn as a Jocelyn. If you can hear me, I'm going to leave you as an attendee. But for now, unless she is to be a participant, we'll find out later. I can always advance her later.
Yeah, I don't have her on the updated member list, but
maybe just attending, and that is fine too. That is
sure.
always welcome, we know.
Greetings, Bob. Good to see you.
There we go. Bill's checking in.
I have a question.
Sure.
Were we supposed to have an agenda or anything for this meeting?
Jennifer can, it is posted on our website, but I'm not sure Jennifer can answer that.
Yes, so last Wednesday when you received your invite, that same day you would have received a separate email that had the agenda attached to it.
Because I wasn't paying enough attention.
It's okay. It's a lot of emails coming at you, and we definitely apologize for having to send so many emails. It's just the best process we found so far.
Well, can I find it now without that email? Or
If
can you
you go
resend that email?
to TBARTA.com,
Yeah, I've been looking there and I can't find it.
here's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to, Bill, if you don't mind a minute, let me see if I can share my screen and show what we've got going on here. I'll try to do this here.
Oh, that would help. That would help.
Yeah, give me 1 second here, see what I can do.
Okay. And I'll mute myself again. So
No problem. All right. So you're sharing my screen now. Let me see if I can get this up here really quickly. So when you go to TBARTA, this is our website. And you'll see at the top, these are various tabs. If you go to boards and committees, and then that you have to hover over just that tab. You move down to meeting schedule, and then this is, of course, the page that I'm on. It's going to just regenerate it. And then when you page down, we have some general information, but the actual meeting documents, as you page down, you can see we have the June 17th Citizen Advisory Committee. We open that up, and the very first item at the top will be the agenda. And I'm just going to page through this really quick so you guys can those who may not have the agenda would like to take a quick look at it. We do have some presentations today. Before the new business. So Bill, it's 1:32. I don't know if you want to proceed at this point.
I was just trying to count noses here.
Okay.
And Jennifer, you could do that probably better than I can by calling the roll. We'll call this meeting to order and ask that the roll be called.
Okay. Bob Henyon.
Here.
Bill Roberts.
Bill Roberts here.
Okay. Brian Kazimierkowski. Bob Widmer.
Here.
And visiting us today, trying out the CAC, is Lynn Gruber-White from Hernando County.
I see her down there, but there's no audio for Lynn. Hang on 1 second.
Okay.
She does not appear to have a microphone available at this time.
Or are we back
While
to
you're
Jennifer?
trying to get that worked out, I'll just go ahead and continue.
You continue.
Josh Frank.
And I will not be able to give her. She doesn't have a microphone, so unless she's able to hook one up.
Okay. Richard Bedford. Kelly Miller. Richard Balcom.
I completely lost audio. Sorry.
I do see Rich here. Hang on 1 second. Rich, are you with us?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Travis Norton. Leonardo Tesoritz.
Here.
Bill Johnson.
Here.
David Goodwin.
I'm here.
Tyler Hudson. Rick Richmond.
Here.
Rob Serku.
Here.
Karen Mullins.
I muted her for a second. Let me unmute her.
Okay.
She was here, but there was a little background noise there.
I can't hear you, but I can see you guys. I'm sorry.
Okay. And I see that her alternate Karen Schwartz is here as well, correct, Karen?
Here, yep, I'm here.
Okay, thank you. Walter O'Rourke. And then Sarah Calhoun. Okay, we do have a quorum.
Great. It's always wonderful to have a quorum so we can meet and conduct business and make recommendations to the TBARTA board. Are there members of the public that have comments?
Mr. Johnson, this is Cindy Raskin with TBARTA. I've had the public comment line open since 1 o'clock, and we have not had anyone call in with public comment at this time.
Okay, do we have anybody on the Zoom call that wants to make a public comment?
It does not appear to be.
No. Okay. First agenda item is the consent agenda, and that includes the CAC meeting minutes from the meeting of June 7th, sorry, the meeting of April 15th. Anybody else have comments or questions on the minutes?
Yeah, I have one comment.
Yes, Bob.
I had asked Cindy about the statistics for other things besides van pool, and that did not appear in the minutes.
So I have to interrupt you. So going forward with the minutes, we're kind of only including action items. We do have that for our internal employee action items, but it's not included on the minutes.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Was that something, Bob, that you raised during other business?
No, I raised it just after Cindy concluded her remarks. I kind of hope she remembers.
As part of the Commute Tampa Bay presentation. Okay.
That's correct.
I did have one comment or question. It's on the bottom of the first page. It's in the committee agreed to make a recommendation to the board to endorse a draft executive summary with the following amendments. And it starts up, follow up on regional transportation disadvantaged and computer services. I think that should read include regional transportation disadvantaged and commuter services. Is that the?
Okay, so what addition would you like me to make?
I think substitute the word follow-up with the word include regional transportation and disadvantaged services.
Okay. Okay, that is noted.
Are there any other corrections? If
Bill,
not,
this is Rick Richmond.
Yes,
I just want to be noted, and I don't know if it needs to be changed in here, but I was at the meeting last month, but I wasn't able to be heard. So I did send Jennifer an email after the meeting for that. So to the point that I'm available to be present on this minutes or not, I'll leave it up to discretion, but just to be noted. Thank you.
Yep, we will add you, but just unfortunately, if we can't hear you, we can't get your vote. So I wouldn't be able to include it for that, but I can definitely amend it to include your attendance.
Understood. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
all right. So is there a motion to accept the minutes as amended? Dave, did I see your hand going up?
No, I'm sorry. I'm good. So
Mr.
moved.
Roberts,
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Yep, go ahead.
Okay,
That's good.
thanks,
Yep.
Rich. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Unfortunately, Chair, I do have to do a roll call because we are on Zoom. So I will go ahead and start that.
Okay.
Bob
So-
Hinion.
Aye.
Okay, Bill Roberts.
Aye.
Bob Widmer.
Aye.
Lynn Gruber White.
I'll unmute her.
Okay. Josh Frank.
Aye.
Richard Bedford.
years 2020.
Richard Balcom,
Aye.
Leonardo DeSorts,
Aye.
Bill Johnson,
Aye.
David Goodwin,
Aye.
Rick Richmond,
Aye.
Rob Serku,
Aye.
Karen Mullins,
Aye.
Karen Schwartz,
Let me unmute her for a second. I'll try to unmute her. Karen, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Aye.
Okay, perfect. Motion passes 13-0.
Great. Thank you very much. We will move into our first presentation on the innovative transit technologies. And do we have a member of staff to introduce this, or should we go directly to Jeff?
We can go straight to Jeff.
All right, Jeff, you're recognized. Is he here?
Yeah, can you all hear me now?
Yeah.
We can.
Hello? Okay, you can. Okay, good, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jeff Deemer. I work with WSP, and we have been tasked with looking at and conducting the innovative transit technology studies. Go to the next slide if you want. So the whole purpose of this study was to examine the technical, financial, and regulatory feasibility for implementation of 3 potential technologies in transit applications. Those 3 technologies that we have studied so far have been, or in this study, have been urban aerial gondolas, which can also be referred to as cable-propelled transit or aerial trams. We also have examined air taxis and Hyperloop. This study asked us to look at gondolas and air taxis within the TBARTA region and examine Hyperloop at the state level. The study was structured as a series of technical memorandums. To date, we have submitted a literature and technology review, which kind of outline the state of these technologies, where they stand, who the players are, where they are on implementation. We concurrently conducted industry interviews for the developers of these technologies. So developers, we spoke to air taxi developers, we spoke to people in the regulatory environment, manufacturers of gondolas, et cetera. Today specifically, I'm going to be speaking on the governance and regulatory environment, which was our 3rd tech memo. And since that tech memo, we have already gone ahead and submitted to TBARTA the corridor analysis and market connections, and as well as a draft final report. Next slide, please. Throughout the presentation, down at the bottom, you'll notice this kind of little technology ratings guide. It just gives you an idea of where this technology is in terms of whether it's still being research and development, prototype testing, or is it actually being deployed currently, or is it up and running in day-to-day operations? So just kind of a handy guide to let you know where we stand with these technologies. So up first we have gondolas. So in terms of implementation, gondolas, they are in operation across the world. You will see them in South America and Europe as some transit applications. They're well understood. In the United States, we actually do have 2 applications of gondolas in a transit context. Out in Oregon, there's the Portland Aerial Tram, and in New York City, there's also the Roosevelt Island Tram. And those are both associated with the public transit agencies. In Florida, we have also witnessed the recent implementation of the Walt Disney World Skyliner to help with some movement of passengers throughout the various parks. Next slide, please. There is actually no federal regulatory body when it comes to gondolas. So it's kind of left up to the states for the most part. FDA, the Federal Transit Administration, has no real general requirements or guidelines for these systems. but there's nothing to preclude FTA funding from being used on the capital costs for a gondola system. You would just have to follow some of the standard Buy America Act, meet ADA requirements, et cetera. Though there's no federal regulatory body that mandates guidelines on this, you would potentially be interacting with the FAA, or excuse me, other federal organizations depending on what you cross. Depending on tower heights, you may be dealing with the Federal Aircraft Administration, or if you're crossing navigable waterways, you very likely would be dealing with the Coast Guard, et cetera. Next slide, please. So in the absence of any sort of federal guidelines, the industry has instead relied on the American National Standards Institute, which is basically a private nonprofit that allows industry groups to establish and codify their various operations. So there are specifically ANSI standards related to aerial and passenger ropeways. Like I said, the committee is made up of various operators, manufacturers of these technologies. So they kind of cooperatively develop the baseline design and installation requirements, what the electrical design might be, and the operations and maintenance schedules. In terms of state safety oversight, it's a patchwork across the U.S. In areas where we have historically seen cable propelled transit, you will oftentimes find a tramway safety board. So in the Northeast U.S., Appalachian Mountains, Colorado and Utah, so your ski areas, they will often have a state oversight board that does examine operations. The Roosevelt Island Tram in New York falls under the New York State Department of Labor oversight. The Portland Aerial Tram has no state oversight, and the Disney Skyliner also has no state oversight on their operations. Specifically in Florida, we do not have state oversight boards. Disney relied on the ANSI standards when they developed their Skyliner in Orlando. So that's the ANSI standards are kind of the baseline which everyone operates upon. And one thing to point out is that there have been a number of areas in the state of Florida that have mentioned potential CPT applications and transit solutions. Those include Miami-Dade, Fort Lauderdale, and Pinellas County. So one of the things moving forward is if this does become an actual transit application, there may be some conversations necessary if there is any sort of statewide oversight necessary, but it certainly would not be required. The local oversight, so these are your cities and counties, kind of would be on three main things. They would be responsible for the annual safety inspections. They would have control over some of the land use aspects, as well as where these gondola systems cross. So at a given station, your local government would be involved with inspecting structures, making sure the mechanisms work, making sure all the evacuation plans and drills have been conducted, examining fire and electrical. The local governments also have a lot of control on the land use side in terms of where these station placements may be allowed, as well as what these stations and towers may look like. And then finally, once again, if you're crossing somebody's roadway, you'll have to deal with them, make sure that they're okay with everything. Next up would be air taxis. Air taxis, or the other term is urban air mobility, which is kind of like the overarching encompassing term of everything, including air taxis, as well as the infrastructure, the vertiports where these things need to land, as well as the kind of technological operating side of it. The air taxi developers continue to work through technical challenges testing. The federal government and private sector have been focused on cooperatively developing the regulatory framework, as well as the certification of aircraft and the integration of these operations into communities. Critical governance and safety regulations must be in place before UAM can actually become a reality. So at this currently, all of the air taxi stuff is they need to figure out how they're going to operate before you can really start seeing any sort of passengers being on these vehicles. In terms of oversight, the FAA is going to be carrying the heavy lifting on this. The FAA has control of the navigable airspaces, so that's basically 500 feet and above, and anything below that kind of is the local realm. So the FAA would be responsible for looking at air traffic control, safety, how these vehicles navigate through space. While, as previously mentioned, the local side would be land use and zoning, looking at some privacy issues, trespass, nuisance, and law enforcement operations. Next slide. So with these two realms, one is going to be much more top down. On the federal side, you're going to see a lot of leadership from them in terms of the air traffic and fleet operations and management. So that would basically be licensing the operators, understanding how these fleets operate. They would also have a lot of input on the vehicle development production, so the certification of the vehicle and determining the airworthiness of these various technologies. And this slight typo on the slide. The next one should be airspace system design and implementation. So that's an understanding of the cybersecurity of these systems, the infrastructure requirements. If they want to get to a point where there's kind of a given vertiport would be usable by any sort of like manufacturer or developer. On the next kind of two silos, you'd be seeing a lot of federal and state and local coordination. So you'd be expect to see that on how these individual vehicles are managed and operated within an area's airspace. So that could take the form of registering these vehicles, pilot certification, et cetera. And you also have the community integration side. So an understanding the land use and zoning side, noise requirements, where is it tolerable to have these vehicles operate, as well as the infrastructure requirements. NASA has kind of been taking the lead on the air taxi realm. They are leading a number of visioning and recommendation type activities. They have increased their funding for research and development, and they've begun early stages of engaging state and local stakeholders. So they're not working in like a traditionally highly technical aviation community. They're really kind of branching out and making sure the wider community has an understanding of these technologies. So NASA has previously done the Grand Challenge, or was which essentially come called the UAM Advanced Air Mobility Initiative. And they're also working with communities to develop CONOPS, or concepts of operations, to bring the industry and local actors together. As previously mentioned, your state and local governments have no authority over airspace for the most part. So that really kind of leaves the land use side, privacy, trespass, nuisance, and law enforcement. But some states and cities have begun working with NASA and the FAA to begin having conversations about how these would operate and beginning to form early partnerships. And some of these partnerships actually result in demonstrations already. Next slide. So back in January of 2020, EHONG received FAA approval to test a non-pilot test flight in North Carolina without any passengers. So there are a handful of areas of regulatory evolution needed before you see these operations. Air traffic management and fleet operations still need to develop vehicles and produce them and get all of the certification done. You also have to design your airspace systems. You then have to determine how you manage individual aircraft and design their operations within a community. And then you have to determine how these vertiport locations and flight paths are going to be integrated into your community. So there's kind of two main things with air taxis that people are excited about. That's the electrification side and the automation side. So with the electrification, which makes air taxis so attractive, is you see much lower O&M costs. You have a lot less noise with electric motors and emissions. And a lot of developers can test under existing FAA certification process these aircrafts. Then on the second track, you have the automation side, which is far more complicated and slower to integrate over time. So you'd be seeing those as kind of like the decade away type of thing. Those two tracks will eventually kind of converge together to get us to something on the level of full-scale UAM operations, and that'd be much similar to your 2040 timeframe. In terms of certification, that's all FAA's responsibility. They will determine what is responsible and if it meets all the safety requirements. One thing to note is these It's upwards of $1 billion in a decade worth of time to certify a new aircraft. So it's quite the endeavor. In terms of staging, I'll go through this quickly. This decade, you're going to see certification of these vehicles, continued development of the vehicles, begin to develop operating characteristics. And towards the later half of this decade, you might start seeing some low density operations. From there, the next decade, you'll start seeing medium and higher density operations. So that's just adding more vehicles into a given airspace. And then from there, you could see ubiquitous operations in the 2040 timeframe. Up next, we have Hyperloop. So Hyperloop is currently in the development and testing phase. A lot of research and development is occurring. They have the two well-known prototype testing and research and development facilities are for version Hyperloop 1, they have a test track out in Las Vegas, Nevada. They are currently looking for a location to develop a Hyperloop certification center. One of the other major players is Hyperloop Transportation Technologies, which has their test track in Toulouse, France. There are a number of agencies, both within the US and across the world, who have undertaken a number of initial feasibility analysis, and those have generally been done in conjunction with the technology developer. So to date, the Federal Rail Administration has been the lead agency in dealing with the US DOT. Or excuse me, the US has been the lead agency from the US DOT dealing with the Hyperloop technology. But there's a little bit of uncertainty about whose oversight authority this should ultimately lie with. It could be the FRA, FTA, Federal Transit Administration might be a little bit more logical, or the FAA. But at the end of the day, there will be a federal agency responsible for enforcing safety requirements and certification. With that kind of a lack of clarity on who does what, USDOT has actually established the NET Council, which is the Non-Traditional and Emerging Transportation Technology Council. The idea is to bring together the various agencies within USDOT to identify and resolve any jurisdictional and regulatory gaps associated with Hyperloop and other emerging technologies. So that oversight components would be safety, environmental, and funding. The end result of this NET Council is to hopefully streamline any sort of regulatory process that would be required from emerging technologies. State governance and regulatory framework. FDOT has the state oversight program. So what you would most likely see is Hyperloop would be considered a fixed guideway transit if it's implemented as a transit system. So if there was any sort of funding sought by Hyperloop or developer, you'd likely see state oversight. You would also look for state oversight whenever this technology crossed railroads, state highways, or any other sort of government-owned right-of-way. And you also in the future might see an attempt to rely on some of the state's existing P3 legislation to develop some sort of funding package to potentially fund the implementation of Hyperloop. Local authority, once again, a lot on the land use and zoning side. You will see your kind of state and regional planning agencies are probably going to be better suited to planning for Hyperloop given the distances which this technology is supposed to be covering. But your local and regional agencies will be the primary drivers of integrating these Hyperloop technology into a planning process and working with the developers to make sure that these projects are actually feasible before you move them further forward. So path towards implementation, as mentioned, urban area gondolas are in operation today, so they can start tomorrow. Air taxis are a little bit more complex. Early 2000s, a lot of development on the vehicle, begin to see some early demonstrations, certification and testing. Into the new decade, you will start seeing increasing density of operations and get closer and closer to autonomous remote operations. And then finally, hopefully in the 2040s, you'll see full-scale autonomous operations of these. And then with Hyperloop, right now we are developers are testing and developing the technology. They still need to certify and develop safety standards for all these things. So you usually expect that to take the second half of the 2020s. And then you probably really wouldn't see any Hyperloop project to the ground until 2035 plus. These next slides are just kind of next steps that we have since already taken. The following tech memo, we developed transit profiles to see where demand between various activity centers may be needed. So, next slide, please. And then we identify some various regional needs and potential applications of these technologies. Next slide. And that's it. I'll certainly open up to any questions if anybody had anything.
Questions for Jeff? Let me ask one if nobody else has one, or Bill, did you have something?
I was just going to ask Jeff, thanks for the presentation. It's very interesting and opens up a lot of unanswered questions, but did your study involve any kind of economic analysis as to which one of these types of services might require more government subsidy over the other?
No, we did not, because we know how much gondolas would cost and what that would entail. There's just way too many questions in terms of Hyperloop and air taxis on the required infrastructure, what those are going to cost. There's not that information out there yet that's reliable.
Okay, thank you.
Jeff, some folks in the Clearwater area have been talking about beach tran. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but would that be an air mobility, or what did you look at that at all, and why did you not focus on it?
We didn't specifically look at air tran because that was classified as maglev technology.
Yes.
So we kind of left that as is.
Outside the scope of the project, or?
Yes, outside the scope, yes.
And why was it outside the scope? Was it too theoretical, or was it just not considered feasible, or?
I can step in here, Jeff. This is Brian. Mr. Chair, originally when we received that earmark, that money was originally given to us specifically to study Hyperloop. And then it was some of our board members were the ones that had expressed interest in air taxis and gondola. So that is how the scope of work was, it's basically how it evolved. There was a consensus when we put the scope together that was the three modes that our board was interested in us studying.
And Jeff, I think you mentioned earlier that there's a final report that either has been or is about to be submitted. Is that report available?
It's probably not available yet. We just submitted it to Brian on Monday, so he still has to do his review.
Okay.
The plan is we will be giving a presentation to the board in July on the final report.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, Bob Henyon would like recognition.
Of course, Bob.
Yeah, I think we're very fortunate in having Disney so close by. Not that we're going to go and touch their base right now, but they really have transit very well organized. And with the thoroughness they do with whatever they do, they're a prime example of the kind of place we can touch base and learn a lot.
So, sorry, can you repeat the first sentence? What did you say?
Since Disney is so relatively close, like 90 miles,
yes.
They really are a prime example of someone we can touch base when we have legitimate questions.
Oh, yeah, we have reached out to Disney, and we did have a phone interview with them about the process that they took to kind of implement it. And we scheduled for like the past 5 months multiple times. We scheduled some attempts to do a tour over there, but with the current health issues in the U.S., we haven't been able to make it over there.
They're amazingly organized.
Yes, they do a good job moving the people around.
Thanks.
So again, the only one that's really in operation is the gondolas or the
Yes.
wire rope.
Yes, aerial gondolas or aerial trams are in operation today.
Are there any pending considerations for that within Florida?
Local government-led? No, there have been. Well, I don't know. That's tough. It's been a mixed bag. So they've all stopped at feasibility studies, and nobody's really moved it on further than that in areas like Miami or Miami. So they're the only ones who've conducted feasibility studies, a public agency.
Do you have any idea why that's not moving farther? Is it, as Mr. Roberts said, economic feasibility just doesn't work, or?
It's a lot of it's. I'll be truthful. I was a little bit skeptical about it as a transit solution when I started this project. It's really grown on me, right? So I think a lot of it is perception on whether or not you deem this as a appropriate type of transit technology. The gondola manufacturers themselves recognize that urban transit solutions are probably going to be the potential new market for them in the near future. So it's a mix of education at the local and state level, and also the manufacturers themselves kind of doing a better job of interjecting themselves in this conversation on what is an appropriate transit technology in certain scenarios. Like with cable rail transit, great going over bodies of waters, mountains, geographic barriers, but it's not meant for all locations.
Okay. Well,
Mr. Collins is asking for recognition.
Yes.
Yes, I was wondering if we could get a cost analysis as for per mile for the gondolas.
Yeah, sure, could do that. Yeah, we already have some tables that show the existing systems, their length, and how much they cost to develop. So yeah, we certainly have that information available.
That's all, Chair. Thanks.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Directed to the speaker, I thought I saw Pinellas was also mentioned for gondolas. Can you tell us where they are in Pinellas County?
That was mainly in reference to a year or two ago, Pinellas County did, I believe it was Pinellas County, did a smart cities application where they looked at some gondola connections from like downtown St. Pete up to like the Gateway area.
And how far?
And that was a US DOT grant program. They didn't get the grant, and I don't believe they've not really moved anything further.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the developer of I can't.
I believe it's the developer
Carillon was proposing that for a going out to the beach or going to the airport down to St. Pete, and but I don't know that it ever got any farther than just proposals. So.
Yeah, I have not seen anything else.
Okay, thanks again.
Okay.
Karen Mullins also asking for recognition.
Karen?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would like to know if these are going to be P3s. Are they going to be running independently from our transit services?
Yeah, we don't know that yet. You could certainly, air taxis, not likely to going to be P3. Gondolas, you could if you wanted to. It sounds like Hyperloop, the developers of the technology, sounds like that would be the one most likely to try to seek a P3 due to just the sheer cost. But nothing's been decided on that.
Thank you.
Again, we will not be meeting in July before the July board meeting. So we really don't have a recommendation or chance to comment on the report since we haven't seen it. So I guess that would be our observation on this presentation. Is that correct? Anybody correct me on that?
Yeah, this is just an information item. And in fact, when we go to the board in July, that will be an information item to the board.
Okay. All right. So if there's nothing else on this subject, we'll move on to the Regional Rapid Transit milestone update. Brian, are you doing this?
Yes, I will be doing this. So thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I go any further, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, okay, good. So good afternoon, committee members. I'm Brian Passaro, Principal Planner with TBARTA. I'm the Staff Project Manager for the RRT study. Before I get into the slides, I want to give everyone a heads up that I'll be giving a slightly different version of the presentation that's in your packet. The version that's in your packet is what was presented to the board in May. I've added some information that will be presented to the board next week. Unfortunately, that information was not available at the time of the agenda mail out for the CAC, but I wanted to make sure that this committee has the most current information. So I just wanted to throw that out there. We are at milestone 2 of the project. Milestone 1 occurred back in November, where the board directed us to look at 5 design alternatives. And we want to narrow that number down to 3 and begin the NEPA environmental analysis on those. If you go to the next slide. We are handling milestone 2 over the course of 2 board meetings. At the May board meeting, we shared the RRT conceptual design, the capital costs of the 5 alternatives, and we also discussed comparative performance of those 5 alternatives. We wanted to give the board a month to think over the information that we presented, meet with them one-on-one, and then come back in June to decide on the 3 alternatives to carry forward. Next slide. The next 3 slides that I'm going to show you show the recommended alignment along the various parts of the route. So in Pinellas, the RRT would operate in the BAT lanes or business access transit lanes in downtown St. Pete. And then once it gets on I-275, it would operate in a 12-foot dedicated bus lane on the outside shoulder until it gets to the Carillon Intermodal Center. When it leaves the Carillon Intermodal Center, the RRT would transition into the express lanes on the inside of I-275 and use express lanes across the Howard Franklin Bridge. Next slide. Once the RRT gets into the West Shore area, it would operate on the inside of I-275 in a transit way. That would carry the RRT almost all the way into downtown Tampa. Next slide. As the RRT leaves downtown Tampa and heads north, we're leaving both options open, meaning the RRT could operate either in the inside shoulder, which you see depicted in the top picture, or in the outside shoulder, which you see depicted in the bottom picture. We're leaning towards having the RRT operate on the outside shoulder. Next slide. Our consultant, WSP, has been putting together a 3D model to help illustrate what the stations could look like. The slide you see here shows an example of the Waters Bird Station area from several different perspectives. We're going to be using this 3D model more in the months ahead because I think it does a very good job of helping to show people what we're talking about with regional rapid transit. Next slide. In terms of the routes, what we are proposing is not just a single route that goes from Wesley Chapel to St. Petersburg, but rather what is called in transit circles a trunk and branch system. Basically what that means is that you would have multiple routes operating in the corridor. The trunk is the part of the corridor that's shared by all or almost all of the routes. So the area that between West Shore and Bears Avenue, where you see the overlap of the routes, that is the trunk. The advantage of a trunk is that you can offer very high frequency service because of the overlap of the routes. The branches are the part of the corridor that are particular to an individual route. An example of a branch would be the St. Pete to Gateway connection that you see in orange. We're proposing a network of 7 routes that could be bundled into 4 groups or connections. The first connection is Wesley Chapel to downtown Tampa. The second connection is North Tampa to West Shore. The third is St. Pete to Tampa, and the fourth is St. Pete to Gateway. Next slide. So I mentioned that we want to carry forward 3 design alternatives into the NEPA environmental analysis. We do want to carry forward alternative 1 as one of those 3. Alternative 1 would serve as the baseline. Alternative 1 is express bus service with no additional investment in the corridor beyond what TB Next already has planned and minimal investment in the stations. Next slide. This slide shows the projected performance of alternative 1. This is the projected performance of those 7 routes if they were operated as basic express bus with bustle and shoulder operations. When I say bustle and shoulder operations, what I mean by that is that the buses would be allowed to use the shoulder as a bypass lane to congestion if speeds in the general purpose lanes drop below 35 miles per hour. So that is not the same thing as a freeway BRT lane, which is what the other alternatives assume. Under alternative 1, the travel time from St. Pete to Tampa ranges from 52 to 57 minutes. From Wesley Chapel to Tampa, it ranges from 51 to 97 minutes. Under alternative 1, we're looking at about 3,700 to 4,000 riders per day. And of those, between 1,100 and 1,300 would be new transit riders. So that's the baseline. Next slide. This slide shows the other 4 alternatives. Alternative 2 is the Catalyst project that came out of the Regional Transit Feasibility Plan. The portions of the route that are in purple show where it would operate in freeway BRT lanes. The green segment shows where it would operate in express lanes, so that's on the Howard Franklin Bridge. The pink segment at the bottom represents the business access transit or BAT lanes in downtown St. Pete. And then the light blue shows where it would operate in mixed traffic. Alternative 3 adds additional bus lanes north of Bears Avenue into Pasco. Alternative 4 has the RRT operate in a dedicated bus lane across the Howard Franklin Bridge instead of in the express lanes, which is the current plan. And then finally, alternative 5 assumes that almost the entire RRT route would be in a dedicated bus lane. Next slide. This slide shows the capital cost ranges for all 5 alternatives. The top row shows the capital cost for the transit alignment and the stations. The second row shows the capital cost of the transit fleet, the maintenance yard, as well as costs for professional services and contingency. The third row is the total capital cost. No surprise that alternative 1 is the cheapest. Interestingly, there's not much of a cost difference between alternative 2 and 3. But with alternative 3, you get a much higher percentage of freeway BRT lanes because we would, like I said before, we would be adding freeway BRT lanes to the segment north of Bears into Pasco County. Alternative 4, which would have the RRT operate in a dedicated bus lane across the Howard Franklin Bridge instead of the express lanes, is a big jump in cost. The reason why alternative 4 is so expensive is because there is not enough right-of-way available on the bridge to accommodate both express lanes and a dedicated bus lane. There's not enough room for a dedicated bus lane on the outside shoulder, and current FDOT policy does not permit the buses to operate in the express lane shoulder. That means the RRT project would have to bear the cost of widening the bridge to create the needed space for a dedicated bus lane. Now, that being said, FDOT has told us that widening the bridge would not be necessary if express lanes were no longer in operation, or FDOT changed its policy to allow bus operations in express lane shoulders. If either of those two were to occur, then there would be sufficient right-of-way to create a dedicated bus lane without the need to widen the bridge. There's one other thing I want to point out about alternative 4. Alternative 4 puts us at about 68% dedicated bus lanes. That's actually lower than alternative 3. So it's more expensive and you don't get as much dedicated bus lanes out of it. And finally, alternative 5, which has us at about 87% dedicated bus lanes. That's the most expensive option, obviously. Next slide. This slide compares the travel time savings for the 5 alternatives. It shows the range of travel time for the St. Pete to Tampa segment. That's what you see in the dark blue. And then the range of travel time for the Wesley Chapel to Tampa segment, which you see in the light blue. Let's see. So this under alternative 1, the travel time from St. Pete to Tampa ranges from 52 to 57 minutes. From Wesley Chapel to Tampa, it ranges from 51 to 97 minutes. Alternative 2 shaves off about 5 to 6 minutes on the St. Pete to Tampa segment, and it shaves off 7 to 12 minutes on the Wesley Chapel to Tampa segment. Alternative 3, which adds dedicated bus lanes north of Bears and Pasco, that shaves off 12 to 19 minutes from the Wesley Chapel to Tampa segment. Now, remember that I said that alternative 2 and 3 were pretty close in capital cost, but alternative 3 gives you a greater time savings. Alternative 4, the bridge option, shaves off 10 to 11 minutes from St. Pete to Tampa. Remember though that there was a big jump in costs for alternative 4. So for all the money that you're spending, you're not getting that much of an improvement in time savings compared to alternatives 2 or 3. And finally, you have alternative 5, which combines the time savings from alternatives 3 and 4. Next slide. This slide shows the ridership performance of the 5 alternatives in terms of daily riders and new daily riders. As stated earlier, with alternative 1, we're at 3,700 to 4,000 riders, which is pretty decent considering that it doesn't have dedicated bus lanes. It's just express bus service. With alternative 2, we're at 5,500 to 5,800 daily riders. Alternative 4, 5,700 to 6,000 daily riders, and alternative 5, 7,300 to 7,600 daily riders. Alternative 3 really stands out here. Next slide. Scott Pringle from WSP, he's going to be presenting this information to the board next week. Based on the data, it's staff's recommendation that we carry forward these 3 alternatives into the NEPA environmental analysis. Alternative 1 is the baseline, alternative 3 is the mid-level investment, and alternative 5 is the high-level investment. And that's my presentation, and Mr. Chair, I'll open up. I'll try and answer any questions as best as I can.
Brian, as far as this organization in recommending to the board, you are suggesting that we consider making a recommendation based on what we've just seen. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Questions from?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I have a comment.
Yes.
You clearly, I think, Brian, presented alternate 3 as greater time savings, the best ridership, and more bus lanes north. I mean, it looks like a winner to me.
Yeah, I mean, obviously with alternative 5, you're going to get the most ridership and the most time savings because that's like the full package. I think what I was trying to point out with alternative 3, the thing that stands out about alternative 3 is that the capital costs, it's not that much different from alternative 2. I mean, you're pretty much in the same range, but just adding that extra part up in Pasco County really gave a bump in the ridership and the time savings. And that's what I meant by alternative 3 standing out.
And of course, that gets us closer to Hernando County if they want to get to Pasco to get down into the city.
I have a comment too. How long would these projects take? I agree. Number 3 is like the Goldilocks of all of the solutions. But how long would it take to actually implement that?
You have to remember that the Regional Rapid Transit project is tied to the construction schedule for TB Next, which is going to be phased in over segments. And I'm sorry, I don't have, and unfortunately, I don't have the TB Next schedule at my fingertips right now. But I mean, you're easily looking from ultimate build out, you know, from Wesley Chapel all the way down to St. Pete. I mean, you're looking at it probably at least 10 years before it would be fully constructed. And so what we will probably have to look at is phasing the project in over time, like perhaps maybe doing the St. Pete to Tampa segment, and then the Tampa, the Wesley Chapel segment is 2 different phases.
Right. Well, as far as I'm concerned, the only one that I really care about is the St. Pete to Tampa one. The rest, it's fantastic, but I probably will not be riding all the way up there.
And actually, you know, and that's something that we recognize, that most people are not going to be traveling from Wesley Chapel to St. Pete or vice versa. And that's why WSP has come up instead with this concept of a trunk and branch system.
Right. No, I think it's really the way to go. Absolutely. Because you see that in other transit systems too. It's not like you're inventing something new. When you look at how Denver developed its transit, how it's been in Boston for a long, long time. Yeah.
I have quite a few questions, so bear with me. In one of your slides, you showed an example of the Bird and Waters Ave station. In the previous presentation, I think that Scott gave a couple months back, there was a lot of talk about transit-oriented development and sort of tying in the regional route with the BRT project on Florida Ave, maybe sharing that bus rapid transit lane so you have a little bit of overlap between 2 major routes. And I didn't see any of that. It seemed like station areas were on the shoulder themselves. Can you maybe go into a little bit more detail as to why that decision was made to not jump off and back onto Florida Ave and then back on the interstate?
Yeah, no decision has been made. The purpose of that slide, I think, was just to show the capability of the 3D software of showing what it can do for you. We are certainly looking at other configurations. We just chose those 3 orientations just as a sample of showing what the software is capable of doing. But no, we have not ruled it. We have not ruled anything out at this point.
Okay, I think that's a very critical piece, and you know, showing that graphic, I understand, as a way to maybe test the limits of what you're able to show, but it's very misleading because I think that component, the TOD component, is such a critical piece to the success of this route potentially and others, as well as the stations themselves. And that kind of leads me into my second question, which you showed the ridership per alternative scenario, but can you give us maybe a greater breakdown as to which segments have more ridership? Because as a previous comment sort of talked about, I don't foresee the ridership really being high between Wesley Chapel and downtown, but I would like to see how each alternative illustrates ridership by segment. So if it's a high ridership between Carillon area and downtown Tampa, as opposed to Carillon and St. Pete, I think that makes a big difference potentially in how these are evaluated. So
I'm sure that WSP has that data. I don't have it at my fingertips, but if
Sure.
you're interested, I can ask Scott if he could give me some sort of breakdown of the ridership.
I think that's really important, because if we're making a decision based off of 3 alternatives and one of them has only 300 people going to Wesley Chapel and 5,000 people between these two, I think that does, influence the way we're evaluating these.
Now, to be clear, what we're asking today, we're not asking for concurrence or agreement on the operations plan. The only thing that we're looking for a decision by the committee is on which alternatives we carry forward to the environmental analysis. That's all we're asking for today.
Sure. Get that. I just think that that's an important level of detail as we move forward. That would be good to have. And then my last question is, is it possible to break that also down into a cost per mile for each of those instead of just a lump sum? Because how many miles is the route total?
It's 41.
41. Okay. So typically, I like to look at these in terms of comparing cost per mile for other modes of transportation. So this is a future transit envelope. It doesn't necessarily have to be BRT long-term. So I think it'd be good to maybe show that as a cost per mile where we can judge that against other modes of transit.
We definitely will. I wasn't sure about cost per mile. We're definitely going to have to break it down by cost per trip because FTA requires that as part of the evaluation. But I can check into whether or not we'll also be breaking it down into cost per mile.
Yeah, because in my mind, for example, I'm thinking, okay, streetcar extension is $30 million a mile. And if this is $200 million a mile, why don't we just do modern streetcar? That's how I'm sort of weighing these in my mind. So I appreciate the presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, one more comment, Mr. Chairman.
Sure, go ahead.
When I look back at the TB Next modernization projects, they had identified 9 different projects, 6 of which follow the RRT roadway as you've described it, since you said there's quite a link between RRT and TB Next. So my question would be, the other 2 pieces are I-4 going east and I-75 going north and south. So you're fighting as you're doing your costs. I see you're fighting for scarce dollars. Do you think you can win that battle, or what do you have to do to win the battle over I-4 and I-75?
Brian, you're muted.
Oh, there. I guess that's really the $1 million question, no pun intended. I mean, the only thing I can say is, as we move forward, we as TBARTA need to continue to make the case that these 2 projects are joined together. Because, I mean, let's face it, there are some people that do not like the TB Next project and want it to go away. What some of these people may not realize is if TB Next goes away, there is no regional rapid transit. And so I think in order to, as we're trying to compete for dollars and making sure that the TB Next segments of 275 move forward and continue to get funded, we need to make the case that this is not just a highway project, it's a transit project also.
Thank you.
Mr.
Rob?
Bill?
Henyon and Leo Doss are asking for recognition.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Bob.
Rob.
Yeah. Based on what Bob Whitmer had said earlier in his first presentation, he mentioned the interest of Hernando County, and that's very important too. We have to be very careful that we represent the interest of this entire very large region, not just the core of Hillsborough and Pinellas. So I really think that that's something we have to be always mindful of, because it's very easy to become divided and fail because of that.
Thank you.
Rob Cersei?
Yeah, I was just kind of to both those points too, and with Josh was saying from a cost perspective, not just the that cost, but breaking it. If it's 3 different phases, what's the cost for one phase versus the other phase, and cost how many riders from that. So not just the overall project, but when you look at it and break it down, because although you may find that there's more riders here, if you're competing for dollars and you can get one part of the phase done with dollars and you're still making a significant impact in an area, that can be something to weigh.
Bill Roberts?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In part answer to Bob's question about is the funding going to be available, let me remind this committee that as long as 10 years ago, the DOT district has been telling this region, you come up with a plan and we will seek to fund it if it is a reasonable plan. So I remain optimistic that we'll get a plan together, and then the DOT, as they've done with the West Shore Interchange, will go to bat for the region and get the money. Brian, I would like to ask you if you've taken into account 2 factors in Hillsborough County. One is the vote by the Tampa City Council to oppose express toll lanes in the TB Next project. And secondly, what the plan would be yet to exit the interstate and actually go down to ground level with this transit plan. Any comment on either of those?
All I can say is, we coordinate on a monthly basis with the TB Next team and trying to make sure that they are taking into consideration our design needs for the RRT. If things change so that express lanes are no longer part of the picture, and really that the only place right now, the only place that would have an impact on the RRT would be across the bridge, then we'll have to adjust our plans accordingly.
Okay, well, the Tampa City opposition is to express lanes from West Shore to downtown. So just so you're aware of that.
Well, I guess but through the West Shore area, the RRT would not be in the express lanes. It would be in its own transit way. So, so even if the express lanes fell out, I think we would still have the transit envelope to work in.
Okay, thank you.
Other thoughts or questions?
I know that Lynn Gruber-Wright would like attention.
Oh, thank you for pointing that out, Lynn.
Let me unmute her here.
Oh, sorry.
There she is.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Go ahead, Lynn.
As advocates for public transit, I think that one of the things that we should be looking at in this report most of all is the number of new riderships that we will get on any one of these alternative plans. And when we look at this, we can see that, as it's been called by another member here, option number 3 is our Goldilocks. It's where we get the most new riderships from, which therefore then is the best investment. Because what we're doing as transit advocates is trying to advocate to make transit work for our communities.
Okay. Other comments, questions?
Chair, this is Rick Richmond. I have a question.
Yeah.
Brian, and this goes along with kind of what Bill Roberts was saying, but also the piece on 275 going north, where currently there's a plan to add additional lane capacity there, but you know, there is pushback for improvements in that area. Does your current footprint for running north of 275, north of downtown 275, essentially like to Waters, I believe, does that incorporate the additional auxiliary lane, or that's planned, or can it run in the existing footprint?
I guess is the question, could the RRT continue to operate in the segment north of Tampa if there was no lane widening done? Is that the question?
Yeah, is your plan based on the anticipation that there is going to be an improvement in that corridor? Okay. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you.
So without that lane widening, we would be unable to move forward with segments of this project?
Well, it's not that there wouldn't be. I mean, if FDOT did not move forward with doing the lane widening, it's not an issue that there wouldn't be space. The issue is that we are piggybacking off of an FDOT project. I mean, FDOT is paying for the alignment improvements. So it's not just that they're adding a lane in that particular segment, they're also going to be constructing the shoulder in such a way that the buses would be able to use it, you know, all day long. If that project goes away, then what that means is the regional rapid transit can no longer benefit from the dollars that FDOT is bringing to the table to do that project. It would now fall on us to construct the shoulder or whatever lane we need for the buses.
Which, if I just have one more note, I think speaks again to what I mentioned and what Rob mentioned about the potential to phase some of these aspects, because if that component in that segment is no longer viable, but there is decent ridership projections from, say, some of the other smaller trunk lines, that may be of value, despite a segment that may not necessarily be as valuable. So I think to be flexible enough to say, yeah, we can get a portion of this up and running, as opposed to having to do all of it or nothing, I think is really important, because there's so many unknowns with a lot of these segments and piggybacking on FDOT. So I would just reiterate that point.
Mr. Chairman, if I could ask, you're probably aware of the good news that the Central Avenue BRT project in St. Pete has been funded. Yes, great news and long time coming. So keep your hopes up that this will happen too. That project is at least 10 years coming. How are those two projects? Is there a process to integrate the BRT Central Avenue with the regional transit project at this point?
We're actually we have a meeting later this week with what's called our exec team. And one of the things we're going to be talking about specifically are the downtown St. Petersburg stations, because as much as possible, we want to try and co-locate the RRT stations with the Central Avenue BRT stations. And so we got to we need to have a conversation about, you know, things like the architectural, the station design, what features and equipment are going to be at the station. So yes, we're going to be having these conversations with PSTA.
Great, thank you. Good to hear that.
It does make some sense to build a chain that adds to an existing improvement rather than stringing things out independently. Bill Roberts?
Mr. Chairman, this has been great discussion, and Brian, I appreciate the presentation. if the chairman agrees, I'd make a motion that we accept the staff recommendation to forward these three options to the TBARTA board.
I'd second
Chairman,
that.
I'd second that. Ms. Falcon.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there further discussion on the motion? I don't see any hands up. So let's take a vote. All those in favor, let's see, we have to do this roll call, right?
Yes, yes, I'll go ahead and do a roll call. Okay, Bob Pinion,
Yes.
Bill Roberts,
Yes.
Bob Widmer,
Absolutely.
Lynn Gruber White.
Yes.
Bob, excuse me, Bob Henyon, can you take over the meeting for a couple moments? I
Okay.
have to step away for a minute.
Okay, moving on to Josh Frank,
Aye.
I hear you.
Richard Balcom,
Yes.
Leonardo DeSorts,
Yes.
David Goodwin,
Yes.
Rick Richmond,
Yes.
Rob Serkru,
Yes.
Karen Mullins,
Yes, twice.
Karen Schwartz.
Yes.
Okay, and with the absence of Bill just stepping out for a few moments, the motion does pass 12-0.
Well, Bob, I would think
I don't have the agenda in front of me.
I can tell you, I believe, Jennifer, you can correct me. I think we're going to have an Envision 2030 update from Chris Dianuntis. That should be
That
next.
is correct.
That is correct. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Chris Dianuntis here with the Senior Planner with TBARTA. I do not have a presentation for you. I just have a brief update on Envision 2030. Public comment period for Envision 2030 closed on June 1st, and Tina Oliver is finalizing the reports and have incorporated the CAC comments into the executive summary and the final report. A presentation to TBARTA board will be given on Monday, June 22nd, and the recommendation is to adopt the Envision 2030 RTDP, as well as a video introducing Envision 2030 has been produced and will be aired at the board meeting on Monday, June 22nd. And we will also be giving presentations on the project to all the 5 county commissions and the MPOs. That is my brief update.
Is this an item we need any action on?
No, this is just an information item.
Okay. Again, Chris, what do we have next on our agenda?
What do we have next? The next item, and I think we're off to come back to this, was the CAC chair and vice chair elections, which our chairman was going to handle. But I would suggest we move past that and come back to that when he is back here.
Wait. We need to vote him in while he's gone.
We cannot do that. He's already served two terms.
Good thought.
I'll nominate Bill Johnson as chairman.
I second.
I'll second it.
Guys, unfortunately, we're not able to do that because he's already served 2 terms. So per the bylaws, you can only serve a maximum of 2 terms.
Okay, then I will nominate Bob Widmer to be the chairman of this committee, and I am going to decline being vice chair. I have a paralysis of one of my vocal folds, and it makes it impossible for me to rely on my voice on a daily basis. And one of the main duties of the vice chair is to fill in and chair the meetings, and I just can't rely on my voice. I will keep speaking and still be a very active member, but I feel I'm not fit to carry on as vice chair.
Second the nomination.
All right, I second that.
With all due respect, and thank you, Mr. Henyon, I would not like to be recommended. I have said in the past that we represent a very small part of this group. And I like to hear the big boys, the Hillsborough, Pinellas, and Pasco, who live closer to the projects that are going on. I like to see them steering the ship. But thank you
Well,
anyhow.
I agree with you, Bob, but I think that maybe I should have nominated you as vice chair, because I think it is important that we represent the interests of the extremities of our organization, as well as just the central core.
Thank you. I don't have a problem with that.
Pardon me?
I don't have a problem with that. Thank you.
Okay, so I nominate you as vice chair.
I second.
I see our chairman has returned. Would we like to bring him up to speed on where we're at this point?
Yes, so there has been a motion and a second to nominate Bob Widmer as vice chair. And I don't believe we have had a nomination yet for the chair position.
Oh, okay. Is there, so usually you do the chair and then you pick a vice chair.
Yes.
We tried that.
Oh, you did? Well, can I go back on the motion that I had a refrigerator repair person here that had been here for a couple hours and I needed to find out what's going on there. So did the motion pass for the recommendation on the, and can you record me as a aye on that motion as well?
Yes, I will go back and it did pass, but I will update it to 13-0.
Okay. So
I believe Bill was missing when it was stated that because he's had 2 terms as chair, he can't serve another term, which is unfortunate.
Very unfortunate.
Correct. Well, thank you, but that's the way the bylaws are, so we move on. So we have a motion for a vice chair. And the second for the vice chair. Is there any interest in making him the chair instead?
He didn't want it.
Oh.
I would nominate Bill Richards from Hillsborough for chair. For chair.
I'm sorry, Rick Richmond or Bill Roberts?
Bill Richards.
Bill Roberts?
Bill Roberts, yeah. My brain's getting fuzzy.
Yeah, I know. I feel that.
I'll second that.
All right. I would prefer to take the position of chair first and get that out of the way and then go to second. But we have a motion for Bill Roberts for chair and a second for that. Are there other nominations for chair?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Rich Balcom, since I'm the alternate from Pasco and the actual committee person is not here, I don't know what her position would be. I think Pasco, as one of the other committee members mentioned, should be have a good voice in steering what we're doing here. I'd like to give her the opportunity to participate in this vote. I'm willing to kind of nominate her, but I didn't want to do that without discussing or having her here at a meeting. And if we maybe could consider tabling this for maybe one more meeting for the chair. I appreciate the other nomination, but maybe we would have another nomination as well.
Does our staff have a guidance as whether that would be in order?
I'm not sure that we can do that. I mean, according to the bylaws, if, we're supposed to be doing it at a certain meeting.
Mm.
And we did send out the agenda as well. So even if people were not able to attend, they could have taken a look to kind of see what we were going to be discussing.
Mm.
All right.
I think we all assumed that Bill Johnson was going to continue.
And I think that was an assumption. I didn't know that that was a restriction that he would not be able to serve again. But if it is the committee's, the majority of the committee wants to go ahead and move forward, that's fine.
Well, and not that, I think, because one of the other things you run into is we don't have a July, so then you get into August after that as well. And obviously I know Kelly really well, and would not, would certainly support either Bill or her for either one of those positions. But I would venture to say if she thought about it, she would have let you know, Rich.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks, Rob.
The old adage, if you miss a meeting, you're automatically the chair.
Well, there it is.
I don't. I think we need to have the consent of a person in order to take the position here. So.
Okay, I withdraw my consideration then, Mr. Chairman.
All right. So are we ready to vote on the chairmanship position? Is there any objection to going ahead? Jennifer, would you call the roll?
Yes. So for the chair position of Bill Roberts, Bob Hinion.
Aye.
Bill Roberts.
Did Bill accept? Yeah. Did he accept?
He smiled.
Oh, okay.
I will accept. I'm not sure I can vote, but yes. Thank you. Thank you, Karen.
Bob Widmer.
Excellent choice.
Lynn Gruber White.
Yes.
Josh Frank.
Aye.
Richard Balcom.
Yes.
Leonardo DeSoris.
Yes.
Bill Johnson.
Yes.
David Goodwin.
Yes.
Rick Richmond.
Yes.
Rob Serku.
Yes.
Karen Mullins.
Yes.
And Karen Schwartz.
Yes.
Okay, motion passes 13-0. Bill Roberts, you are the new chair.
Yay.
Thank you for that.
Congratulations.
Bob and Karen, you're both in trouble.
I'll take
Jennifer,
it.
Jennifer,
Congratulations, Bill.
Thank you.
just technically, since Karen is the alternate to Karen, we really don't count them for as two votes. Is that correct?
Oh.
True.
Yeah, technically it should be one vote.
Yeah. So we can make those
We
corrections.
concur.
We'll love
The
that.
Karens concur.
Yeah, we concur.
We're
Consolidation
badasses.
of Karens.
Exactly.
I'm sorry to interject that in the middle of such a celebration for the right election for Bill Roberts, and I strongly support him and wish him a lot of luck. I guess we need to vote on our vice chair at this position at this time.
I've nominated Bob Widmer.
Right. I'll take that motion, and second is still pending. Jennifer, will you
Yes.
call the vote?
Okay, so voting on Bob Widmer as vice chair. Bob Hinion.
Aye.
Bill Roberts.
Aye.
Bob Widmer.
I'll pass.
You can't vote on yourself.
Watch it, Bob.
Okay.
Lynn
Yes.
Gruber White.
Aye.
Josh Frank.
Aye.
Richard Balcom.
Aye.
Leonardo DeSoris.
Aye.
Bill Johnson.
Aye.
David Goodwin.
David, you're muted.
Looks like he's frozen as well.
Oh.
Let's see.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Rick Richmond,
Aye.
Rob Surku,
Aye.
and Karen Mullins.
Both Karens say aye.
Okay, so motion does pass 12-0. Congratulations, Bob Woodward.
Thank you.
And I will reflect the notes or the record that all the other votes are 12-0 passing.
Right. Bob, I'm so thrilled to see you represented in the leadership chain. And I think it's a reflection of the fact that this is a regional group rather than just a Tampa Bay centric group. So congratulations.
Well, thank you, Bill. That was also Bob Henyon's comments, and look forward to working with Bill Roberts. I have a lot of respect for him and his experience, and for the rest of the team too. It's a great team, and we need to move Tampa into the top 20.
Yeah, definitely. Did we get the update on the Envision 2030 plan from Chris?
We did.
Okay. Is there other new business? I think it's TBARTA CARES Act allocation. That was an update. Is Brian?
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just very briefly, TBARTA will be receiving approximately $2.2 million in CARES Act funding. This is part of the federal relief money due to the COVID-19. Each transit agency across the country is receiving different amounts. We're going to be receiving about $2.2 million. One of the ideas that we had for the funds was to use it to fund regional transportation disadvantage service. The Commission for Transportation Disadvantage recently completed a pilot program in Hillsborough, Pasco, and Manatee counties where they partnered with a transportation network company, a TNC company, to provide door-to-door trips for individuals with intellectual or developmental disabilities. That included providing trips across county lines. As you may or may not know, that's historically been a problem. Community transportation coordinators generally can only provide trips within their county. Chris Dianantis and I, we've been working on a scope of work for a similar service across all 5 of our counties. We're checking with FTA to make sure that this would be an allowable use of CARE Act's funds. But assuming they say yes, and we're going to try and put, like I said, we're going to try and put together a scope of work and put it out to bid. And that's the update.
What is the committee? Are there any questions on that proposal?
That would be the whole 2.2 million?
No, we would not be, as of right now, we're not, that's not the plan for the entire amount. The budget, like I said, the scope of work is still a work in progress. Budget figure that I've come up with, and this would be like assuming like if we did this as a 3-year project, would come to about $650,000.
So I just have a quick comment slash question are there any other similar examples in the region that operate these sort of transit trips within their counties? I believe Hillsborough County has one that I'm familiar with. And I only ask that because I know that generally they tend to struggle and either come and go. And for folks that are developmentally disabled or need these trips, they rely on them for a long period of time. And if you have a lot of interruptions to their service, it could be a major issue to their healthcare, their ability to get to their doctor. So what I would hope is that there's funding enough to maintain it for a decent amount of time so that doesn't happen. And that's all. I just know that they have that tendency sometimes.
Well, it was one of the reasons that we wanted to have the transit disadvantaged included in the 2030 plan.
I just want to add that if I
Go ahead,
might, I
Chris.
just wanted to add that the scope of this project, since you mentioned it, Josh, would not just include medical trips. They would be medical, educational, work trips, cultural trips. I mean, for whatever they needed it for. I think that's important.
But for a 3-year duration, is that what I heard?
Correct.
Okay.
I know my past experience on the PSTA board was that the transit disadvantaged, there's a huge population in this area. And for trips to from Pinellas to Moffett or to the VA centers, and I assume that there would be a similar need from Pasco County down to those centers. So I would strongly support this.
Yeah,
And
Chair, my comment wasn't against the motion or the direction of funding. It was more so that I hope, and I hope it's the desire of this board and of the staff, that it is for a longer term than sort of just the 3-year window. I know it's in our 2030 plan. I know it's a high priority for a lot of us. And my wife works in healthcare with a lot of these folks who use this service. And dependability is very high for this service. So I would just like to see that known from the onset, that it is a longer term priority and not just a 3-year project that goes away. And these folks who may depend on it for those 3 years are left without an alternative. So that's where I'll leave it.
yeah, I think if we pass this as a motion to pass on to the board, I would include a comment saying that we have a concern for it being a permanent service.
And just to explain a little bit about the thought process, I mean, that went into developing the scope of work. As I mentioned, it's the scope of work. It's still a draft. It's still a work in progress. But I think what our thought was setting up the scope as like a 1-year contract with an option to extend for 2, because we want to see how it goes in the first year, see if it's successful. If the pilot program that the CTD did in Hillsborough, Pasco, and Manatee is any indicator, I don't think there's much reason to doubt that it will be successful. Their pilot program was very successful. The issue was they burned through the money quicker than what they anticipated. There's much, and that's typically the problem. There's more demand than what there's money for.
Yeah, to Josh's point with that is to make sure that the money's going to be there for the long haul. So.
Correct. That's my point, is that what I don't want to happen is a repeated, because one of the biggest concerns, my wife's thesis was actually on this topic, is that the dependability long-term for some of these folks is more critical than the service itself for a year. So the longevity is paramount. And that's my only concern, is that we find a way to make this work longer than either a year or 2 or 3, because those folks who use it will depend on it for longer than that.
Very good point.
Do we have
make a motion or anything?
Yeah, that's my question. Do we have a motion?
I can motion to move forward with the note of including long-term availability of the service.
I second.
I would second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Is there a further comments? Hearing none. Jennifer, would you call the roll?
Yes, Bob Pinion,
Aye.
Bill Roberts,
Aye.
Bob Widmer,
Aye.
Lynn Gruber White,
Aye.
Josh Frank,
Aye.
Richard Balcom,
Aye.
Leonardo DeSoritz,
Aye.
Bill Johnson,
Aye.
David Goodwin,
Aye.
Rick Richmond,
Aye.
Rob Surku,
Aye.
and Karen Mullins.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes 12-0.
Okay. Is there any other actions to come before the board?
Mr. Chairman, Chris Jadek would like recognition.
Yes.
Very quickly, earlier it was requested, I think we were talking about minutes, that there be more program statistics provided for our commute with the Tampa Bay program. And then talking with Cindy Raskin, who is director of that program, she wants to let everybody know that the website has been updated with some additional numbers. I'm going to put this up here very quickly so you can see where you can find these. You go to our website, this is our homepage, a tab down to Commute Tampa Bay, second tab under Commute Tampa Bay. And then if you page down here, you will see a tab called Commuting by the Numbers, and it gets updated every month. The most complete numbers are from April 2020, but we do have some more numbers in there. And I know that Cindy routinely updates that and adds new information as it comes in. So I just wanted to pass that information along to our committee.
Can you leave that up for just a second so
Sure.
it can sink in?
Absolutely, I can put that back up.
Wow.
I think that's incredible. It's 64% of the commuters who looked for carpool, vanpool matches found them.
Nice work.
Definitely, definitely.
She's still with us.
Cindy,
Thank you.
you're our hero.
Oh, thank you. You'll notice the numbers are always about a month behind when we move to this new Agile Mile system. We wait till the first of the month following, 30 days following the end of the month to get updated numbers. So we'll have May numbers on July 1st. So early in July, we'll be able to update you with the May numbers. They were really good though. You know, we ended up with, I think it was 1,200 telecommute trips logged as part of the Caring Commutes program. So those number of logged trips is going to be pretty good.
How were you affected by the coronavirus situation?
We had a number, most of our vans for the van pool program, we had some that stayed in service with their regular loads, some that were running with just one rider. And then we had some that were parked. They're starting to go back into service now. As of a couple days ago, we were down to only 11 vans that were parked. So that's pretty good. Things are starting to open back up in those areas. And really, we have been promoting telework and telecommuting. So we've had lots of people joining the program and logging their trips in that way. We also held a series of 3 webinars at the end of April and beginning of May, along with the commute program coordinators for Districts 1 and District 5. It was a series of 3 webinars that we did about telecommuting. So we were able to introduce the concept of longer term telecommuting past this pandemic to a lot of folks who hopefully end up making that part of their regular commute. So, yeah.
Okay. Is there other new business?
I just have a quick question, Chair.
Yes, Josh.
I remember, I believe it was 2 meetings ago, we had the folks from Flamingo Fairs out to talk to us and give us an update and promised us cards. I have not received my Flamingo Fairs card as a beta tester, so I was just hoping maybe to follow up on that.
Do we have any comments from staff?
I can pass that along. I do know the folks on the Flamingo Fair Committee and routinely sit on all those updates. I will tell you that because of the coronavirus situation, the launch that was planned for the beginning of June, understandably, has been pushed off, kind of put on hold as a lot of things are. Sure. But I'll make note that the committee is still anxious to get the cards.
Absolutely. I look forward to it.
Mr. Chairman, Bob Henyon has his hand up.
Yes, Bob.
Yeah. Bill, I'd like to make a suggestion. I don't know if it's already being addressed, but I think it would be appropriate that the board take some sort of meaningful action to recognize the frontline transit workers throughout the region for their outstanding heroic work during the pandemic. I mean, these people are out there day after day putting themselves at risk, and they should be recognized in some fashion.
Terrific idea.
So
You want to
Chairman,
make, Richard?
yes, just a comment. Bill, I just want to thank you for your 2 years of serving as chair and also Bob as the vice chair. And I know we go back a long way, Bill. You'll
Yes.
stay on the board and continue serving the committee, and look forward to working with Bill and Bob in the upcoming year.
I want to go back to what Bob Henyon just said. Do you have any ideas, Bob, for how to acknowledge and recognize the transit workers?
I don't. I think it might be best that we just forward the idea and that they flesh it out. However, but I think it should be meaningful.
Right, right.
No, I would like to say some sort of bonus, but I don't know that that's feasible.
Right.
Not knowing what's feasible in this, I think it has to be some meaningful expression that really recognizes these people for what they're doing out there.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. You know, obviously, yeah, if it's money, it's always good, but
Yeah. Karen Mullen might have some idea. She's worked as a driver.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think money's gonna be an option. Yeah, maybe a day off, but I don't see monetary. You know, unless we can get a sponsorship from some of our merchants or local merchants for everybody.
Some sort of certificate, plaque, whatever.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Bob, could I suggest that you make a motion to implement your suggestion that we would then pass on to the board?
Okay. I move that we recommend that the board of directors take some action to make a meaningful recognition for frontline transit workers throughout the whole region.
Second.
Okay. Is there any other comments on that motion? Jennifer, can you call the roll?
Yes.
Getting lots of work done today.
Yeah. Bob Henyon.
Aye.
Bill Roberts.
Aye.
Bob Widmer.
First class motion.
Lynn Gruber White.
Aye.
Josh Frank.
Aye.
Richard Baltham.
Excellent suggestion, yes.
Leonardo Dosritz.
Aye.
Bill Johnson.
Aye.
David Goodwin.
Aye, absolutely.
Rick Richmond.
Aye, yes.
Rob Surku.
Aye.
And Karen Mullins.
Karen, say I'm traveling right now. Really.
Karen, you were breaking up.
I said aye.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you. So motion does pass 12-0.
All right. Items to report to the board. We have the endorsing the recommendation of the 3 alternatives. We have the comment about the spending of the CARES funds. And we have the suggestion to recognize outstanding heroic work by our transit workers. Is there anything else that I missed? No. Okay. And just since you're here, Bill, will you be able to attend the board meeting, the next board meeting to present the report, or?
Well, I will happily defer to you if you would like to make that presentation, but I'll be available to join you if you can.
Okay, let's tentatively plan on that.
Okay.
Is there any other business to come before the board? I believe it's appropriate to say we're adjourned. Thank you
very
all.
much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank you,
staff.
everybody.
You made
Thank you.
my job as chairman over the last 2 years quite easy. Thank you.
Good job, Bill.
Outstanding job.
Thanks, Bill.
Thanks,
Okay,
Bill.
Yep. Thank you, Bill.
bye.
Thank you, Bill.
Thanks.